right, welcome to today's episode of Tomorrow's Leader, where we dive deep on all things leader related to leading yourself and leading other people. So I want to talk about two different types of people. One that really, really annoys me, and that's the type of person that is, and we all know people like this, constantly really quick to point the finger. So something goes wrong in their organization, and they're blaming, and never accepting responsibility or any of the blame for anything that goes wrong. Those leaders are usually short-lived. They don't usually last very long. Sometimes they defy all laws of physics and common sense, and they do, but most of the time they fizzle out at some point. I want to talk about the other end of that extreme, and what I call the blame takers, the ones that will always point the finger at themselves. Now, somewhere along the line, there became this certain level of honor and respect that came with leaders that would just unconditionally accept responsibility and blame for anything that went wrong. Now, I'm not saying that there's some sense in that in some cases. I think there are times where a leader, ultimately, it rolls up to him or her. You have to take responsibility. But what I'm talking about is the extreme situations where, and you may know people like this, where they take responsibility for things that really were not even in their control at all. They had no influence over, they had nothing to do with, yet they will still take responsibility for it. Now, my perspective on that is, while that's valiant and there's some honor in doing that, at the same point, there's a big price to doing that. And the price of that is it starts to chip away at your feeling of self-worth and confidence and your ability to succeed, which is the most incredibly powerful and impactful mindset and skill set that you need to have, especially as a leader, no doubt. And what brought this to mind is I was dealing with a client. I'll leave names out of it. This is a client, very, very successful CEO. He's been a CEO and COO for many years for a couple of companies, but a company in the aerospace industry, where his organization was going through some major change. He was part of an organization. It was a family-owned organization that was ultimately looking to sell their business. And with this, as CEO, he would get obviously a large payout as part of this. And he knew, going into this organization, which was a handful of years ago, that this was what the family's goal was. They were positioning it for a sale that would ultimately take place in the not too distant future. One of their large customers was Boeing. They had many, many other customers as well. And a couple of things happened that ultimately were totally out of his control, that changed the whole course of the events of this company. The company actually was up for sale, and last year in 2019, they had an offer on this organization, on the company. The family ended up turning it down. Unbeknownst to them, what would happen next would set their organization into a downward spiral. Boeing had some major problems, as you may have known, with their aircraft, 737, where they ultimately ended up pulling the plug on large orders and a large chunk of their business. Secondly, is fast forward to February of this year, or March of 2020, and COVID has happened, which has totally transformed the whole transportation industry, airline industry in particular. So those two things have happened totally outside of his control. But this individual has been, and ultimately the business was not sold. The business is still running privately. He has stepped out of his role with a package that was pennies on the dollar of what it would have been had they sold, of course. And more importantly, is in a situation now of trying to figure out what the next step is. And this individual is later in life and feeling, okay, maybe I'm not as desirable to run an organization. I disagree. I think he is without a doubt. Maybe I don't have what I thought I had and have the abilities or the willingness even to go through this again. What I really heard was a lot of self-doubt and a lot of really, breaks in confidence that was caused by these unfortunate but totally uncontrollable situations and chain of events. Sometimes you have to realize, and you just got to take a step back and say, you know what? We're all going through this. And these things that have happened recently as a result of COVID or whatever other situations may have happened that are outside of your influence and outside of your control, you cannot accept the responsibility to a point where it really deflates your own feeling of self-worth and your feeling of what you're capable of doing. That's where I feel that individual that's the blame taker, that's always kind of putting it on them as to why things went wrong and whatnot. And things could have done better. I could have done something. Well, there are some situations where no, it doesn't matter who you put in that situation. The result would have been the same. You can't change what had happened with Boeing's aircraft. You can't change COVID. You had no control over that. Those two things combined, intersected at a perfect storm and sent the company in a totally different direction. My point with this in my short podcast today is you have to take stock in the fact of what in your life you have control and what you have influence over, and what are the things you have no control and no influence over. The things you have no control, no influence over, don't worry about them. If you have no control, no influence over them, it doesn't make any sense to worry about it, stress about it, get angry about it, frustrated, depressed about it, or even spend any time talking or thinking about it in reality. If you truly can't do anything about it and you have no control and no influence over it. The things you have influence over, maybe spend 20% of your time in mental energy. The things you have control over and true control over, that's where you need to spend 80% of your time, energy, mental strength, and focus and everything. 80% in that control bucket. So nevertheless, wanted to share that with you as an interesting topic I thought might be of help and pertinent to some of you out there that might be going through the same thing. I hope you're not. But of course, I'll always put that out there. If you have stuff like that that's happening, give me a buzz, shoot me a note, whatever. Happy to spend some time with you to talk through it and see if I can give some perspective. So in any event, thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. And we'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks.